Okay, guys, so we're going to start. We're now in the second section of the course, okay? So we're talking about a different thing. The first section of the course, we look at what was the characteristics of trade, why trade is good, why is important, what is happening in the world that really complicates the notions that we have about trade, okay? Now we're going to get into the second part. And so we're going to be looking, we're going to be looking these aspects of what it really means to be in trade. We're going to be talking what happens and how the transformation has been happening between what was called originally the GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, okay, and what is now the ruling body of trade in the World Trade Organization. So what really is happening, and we're going to be concentrating a lot on that, is the transformation of the rules of trade from what is called the multilateral rules of trade, where everybody participates and everybody will get the same benefits, into what has become more and more bilateral trade agreements. Now, the bilateral trade agreements started as bilateral, then they became plurilateral. Now, this is a word which is very funny because only works in this area of ours. So you're going to be talking about multilateral, which implies everybody participates, okay, into what has become quite traditional now, the bilateral trade agreements. Two people, two countries getting together to organize into what is now being called plurilateral. Okay, and the fact that it's called pluri makes it different from multi. Okay? Multilateral will be everybody participating. Pluri is we exclude some countries. But it's not two countries, it's several countries participating. That's why it's called plurilateral. Okay? All of this is really words, but you know. Another thing that's very important is what is called regional trade agreements. Okay, or RTAs. If I'm in the same region, I belong to the same place in the world, it makes sense that I'm going to start doing business with my neighbor, okay? So if I'm going to be doing business with my neighbor, it's going to be a regional trade agreement, same region. But the funny part of these things is that many trade agreements that we're putting together, called plurilateral or even bilateral, are no longer regional in nature. So if I'm sitting here in Mexico and I make an agreement with the European Union, even though it's a plurilateral agreement in the sense that it's Mexico with several countries, or you can consider that a bilateral agreement if you think of it as Mexico with the European Union, but it's no longer regional. There's an ocean between us. Okay? So it makes a lot of sense to do with the United States because we have the same border. But when you think about a trade agreement with a country which is Europe, then you have to really make a big jump. Is that a regional agreement? No, it's not a regional agreement. It's a plurilateral agreement. Could we consider that if I really think about what I'm doing, I'm really making an agreement with 27 countries on the other side. But in many ways, it's a bilateral agreement because what I do negotiate, I negotiate with one single entity, the European community, the body that is really managing all the trade agreements of the European Union. So I go with the European Commission, I work with the European Commission, I do the negotiation with the European Commission, and whatever I do with the European Commission becomes an agreement between Mexico and 27 countries on the other side. But that's because they have already made an agreement and they have become an integrated community. So integration is another question, okay? And there are differences between trade agreements and integration agreements. But those things are happening in the world today. And do affect trade? Yes, because if they are integrated as the European Union, I don't negotiate with 27 countries, okay? I negotiate with the European Commission. And in that European Commission, there is one commissioner for trade. And therefore, it's with this office that I do the negotiations. And then it has to be approved by the European Council. And when it is agreed by the European Council of Ministers, then I have an agreement. Very different if I do business with Japan. I just talk to Japan. Whenever I went to Europe, I had to talk to the European Commissioner, and after that, we have meetings with the 27 ministers of trade, if we really wanted to modify anything. Why? Because I do the original negotiation with one person, if you want to call it that way, the commissioner, but then I have to ratify that with the parliament. It's not a parliament in the full sense, but with the 27 ministers of trade, I have to be in agreement with whatever I agreed with the commissioner. And then after that, of course, if it has to be ratified, it has to be ratified by the European Parliament. But the whole thing is interesting because what we have seen now is we started thinking multilateral, GATT. We went into WTO, multilateral. And then all of a sudden, something happened in the world, and everyone was working bilateral and plurilateral agreements. That's a big change in how we do business. And there is a big discussion in the economic literature regarding whether it's better for the world trade to have multilateral or bilateral, plurilateral, regional trade agreements. But there is something else. What happens if all of a sudden I decide that I'm a nice guy and I want to give you unilaterally benefits? If I do that, I am creating what is called a preferential trade agreement. Okay? Many people use indistinctly PTAs with RTAs. But a PTA, in essence, will be, I am giving you preferences. But isn't that what we are doing when you go into a bilateral agreement? You give preferences to another country. Yeah, but there are unilateral agreements and reciprocal agreements. Okay? So when I go into a reciprocal agreement, what I'm doing is I am giving preferences to another country, but I'm getting preferences from that country. Okay? Isn't that what you're doing in RTAs? Yes. Isn't that what you're doing in bilateral? Yes. So it's very confusing. You have to be careful on that, okay? There are PTAs all over the place because in reality what we are doing is we are creating specific areas of preference between a set of countries. And I call them regional trade agreements when I'm looking at the overall regional trade as a region, even though in many cases I'm transforming that into a plurilateral and doesn't necessarily have to be in the same region, okay? And there are aspects where I will be integrating myself. Those are integrating agreements. And there are aspects where I'm not integrating myself. I'm just integrating trade. Okay? But as I move in all these things, I'm creating a set of sub-specific agreements. So the biggest one, the one that we should be looking for all the time is multilateral. That has to be worked through the WTO. But something happened between this GATT, which was created in the 1940s after the end of the Second World War, and finally the organization does WTO. And what happened between these two in this evolution was the regional trade agreements, or if you want to call it the preferential trade agreements. Okay, you had a question there.
You were talking about the reciprocal. The unilateral is only with custom unions.
No. No, let's suppose I'm the European Union, yeah? And I decide as a set of countries that I want to help the development of Africa. Because, whatever, the roots of our relationship, what have you. Then I said, look, I'm going to take Togo, I'm going to take Benin, I'm going to take blah, 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 or I'm going to take Africa. It depends how I make the agreement, okay? And what I decided unilaterally is to tell these countries, even though I don't have an agreement with you of any nature, the products of these countries, and it's called, in fact, it was called for many years ACP, okay? Which was the African Caribbean Preferential Trade Agreement. And I am going to give you unilateral. I'm not asking for anything in return. What I'm doing is I'm opening my market to your exports. But you have to belong to the African, the Caribbean countries. If you are not from the African or the Caribbean countries, and we can make a list of what countries are those, then I won't accept your products into my territory free of tariffs. But if you belong to those countries, because I'm helping you to develop, then I give you unilateral benefits. I'm not asking for anything in return. Okay? So those are called unilateral preferences, okay?
And that also gives you a foreign direct investment in your country if you do that?
No, not necessarily. What I'm doing is, I'm saying to you, you're a nice person, I like you, I want to help you develop, I know you're an underdeveloped country, I therefore grant you preferences, and I'm not asking for anything in return. Then he comes and he says, wait. Why do you do that for her and not for me? And what do I answer? Yeah, basically what I'm saying is, tough luck, you are not by her, okay? And so the question of the country is, wait, why is it that I am not like the other country? Oh, because you are Mexico, yeah? And you don't belong to the same level of development as Benin. And therefore, I am doing this for a specific promotion of development policies that I believe in as a group of countries. And it is in my decision to say who can get into my house and who can't. And what I'm saying is he can get into my house, doesn't have to pay nothing. But I also want to get into the house. Okay, let's work a reciprocal trade agreement. Because in your case, you can give me things in return. You are not at the same level as they are in terms of development. Okay? And so, sorry, you want to do something with me, you have to negotiate a reciprocal trade agreement. You give me something, I give you something. Otherwise, we won't do it. But this is unfair. Why do you give them those things? Because this agreement is not a multilateral trade agreement. One of the things of the WTO system and the multilateral trade agreement system is not only reciprocity, but also the rule that you cannot exclude anyone from whatever benefits you give. So one of the things that's going to happen is if I negotiate in WTO and I reach an agreement there and I reduce tariffs in something for some country, then I have to provide the same reduction to all countries. It's a non-discriminatory principle. Okay? That's why, in theory at least, it will be better to negotiate in WTO. Because in the end, everybody benefits from what I give to anyone. Whereas, what all these agreements are doing is they discriminate against countries. Okay? Yes, she can export everything into my country, you cannot. This is discrimination. Yeah, but this is discrimination with a good purpose. They are very poor and you are not. It's discrimination anyway, okay?
And what about those countries who pay more tariffs than others? Like, do you think it's a way of discrimination?
Absolutely. Whenever I ask you to pay more, or whenever I put a higher price in your products to get into my economy, I am discriminating you vis-a-vis someone else, okay? So whatever trade agreement you make between two countries, in a sense it is discriminatory because what it's doing is excluding the rest of the countries from whatever benefits I'm giving you, or whatever benefits I'm getting from you. So there is another concept later on which is called the erosion concept, okay? Which is, I give you those benefits, and therefore your products will get into my economy at a lower price, not because they are better produced, more competitively produced, but because I'm giving you an advantage I'm not giving them. I'm giving you the advantage that I do not charge you tariffs to get into my country, whereas I do charge them tariffs. And that charge of tariffs makes a difference in what they can do vis-a-vis you in my market. Okay? And so in my market, by doing this agreement, you and I are discriminating them because you are also going to give me something. Now, if it's unilateral, then that's fine. You're not giving me nothing. I'm giving you this free will because I believe in development. That's fine. But the rest of the countries cannot get their products into my country, European Union, unless they pay taxes, called tariffs. Or I would impose quotas on them, or I do any other kind of control of entry of their products into my market. Whenever I do that, I'm discriminating the rest. Okay? So one of the big questions in the literature right now is, if I do these things, there is going to be trade creation and trade diversion. And if I go into more trade diversion than trade creation, then the world is going to be worse off. The two countries probably will be better off one-on-one, but the world welfare is losing. You had a question?
Yes, that I thought some developing countries pay less than some developed countries. Am I wrong? And why is that like a way of discrimination?
Because if I'm a rich country, just because I'm rich, you are discriminating me.
Yeah, well, maybe developing countries need help.
Well, but that's a question of, this is your conception of justice, yeah? I mean, they deserve better because they are so poor little guys. Yeah, but I'm a rich guy. Why should I be discriminated against them? Because they are poor. That's not my problem. That's their problem. Okay? What you do to me is you discriminate me. Whether you like it or not, you are discriminating me. Whether this is translated into negative conception, okay, that's the reason why they justify it. The European Union justifies that on the basis, this agreement, which by the way is now getting very complicated for them because according to the rules of the WTO, you cannot do that anymore. With this agreement, what they are doing is they are really discriminating you on the basis of underdevelopment. I want to develop, I want to help those countries develop. And therefore, I'm offering my market free of charge to them. So it's nice. You're a nice person. But I am Mexico. Why is it that you let them get their products free of tariffs, whereas you keep charging me tariffs? If you open your market to me as you do to them, I will wipe them out of your market because I'm more competitive. Well, that's exactly the point. I want them to have the advantage of trade coming to my country and then getting the benefits. That's a development issue. It's not an economic issue. Someone was raising their hand. Yes.
And doesn't the WTO penalize the PTAs?
What is happening is we're going to see that. There is an article that allows that to take place given certain conditions. And one of the problems of the ACP, for instance, is that those conditions are not being fulfilled. They have to switch now into something else. So because I signed an agreement with WTO, there are exclusions that are allowed within the articles of agreement. If I don't fulfill those articles of agreement, then we're in trouble. Because what's happening now is these guys then are going to find themselves in the following situation. If they continue to give those benefits, then they have to go multilateral. And if they go multilateral, no problem. You're not discriminating against no one. By definition, then, what's going to happen to many of these economies is because they have other kind of problems, they don't have the right infrastructure, they don't have the right education, etc., they will not be as competitive as I am, Mexico. And therefore, I am going to be throwing them out of your market. But that's not what you wanted. You wanted to provide them with the possibility of sending products to your country and therefore help you develop, not through gifts, but through the possibility of sell the goods in their market. Okay? The point of this thing is, but I get upset because I am Mexico. And then the guy says, well, you are a middle-income country. He says, well, I don't care. I want to be rich. So why do you discriminate me when I have the best products? Because you are middle income. Well, so what? Is that wrong? Okay? So whenever you go into these trade agreements and you get away from multilateral, you are in fact creating discrimination against other countries. Now, in economic terms, what we're talking about is, because you do this, you have two things. One is trade creation. There's going to be more trade between the people who participate, but there is also trade diversion. All those goods that we were consuming through imports from other countries, which are now excluded from the agreement, this is going to be trade diversion. This is the destruction of trade from those countries. Okay? If they are more competitive in producing those goods than the ones that I'm now giving preference to, I am creating a loss of welfare, okay, for the world. We are using resources less intelligent than we should.
But I don't think doing that to the African country is trade diversion, because the difference between Mexico and them is that Mexico has something to give them, and they don't, because they don't have a market for Europe to sell with less tariffs. So it's not really that he's doing it because he wants to be good. He wants the Europeans to have good products, low price, and he has nothing in return to get. So he's like, go ahead, but Mexico can't say that it's been discriminated if he wants to charge the tariffs, but doesn't want to be the one who pays the tariffs. So I think like that is fine. They should have a reciprocal agreement.
No, because if I'm a producer of, let's say, bananas, yeah? So I'm Mexico and I produce bananas. And we do produce bananas, okay? And our market is the United States of America. And I sell my bananas to the United States of America, and I am able to produce at a cost of $1 per pound, okay? So I said, well, I'm going to be putting this into the American market, and the price in the American market is going to be $1.20. I'm the lowest cost producer of bananas in the world, okay? $1, $1.20 I'm selling. An African country comes and says, I also do bananas, and they taste nice. Okay, if it's by taste, let's see which one is the best banana, okay? I would say the Mexican bananas are better, but who knows? You go to, in fact, if you go to Europe, they do enjoy African bananas because they are used to the taste, and they are different in taste. But that's not the point. The point is, they are, well, you know, it's like you buy a Louis Vuitton. I mean, give me a break. What's the difference between a Louis Vuitton and a non-Louis Vuitton purse? They have the same size, same capacity, but it has the Louis Vuitton. How much you pay in the difference between the Louis Vuitton and non-Louis Vuitton? By the way, every time you do that, you are making the husband of Salma Hayek richer and richer, okay? But once you do that, you pay for a Louis Vuitton, I don't remember anymore, but what, $1,000 for the purse? And you go on and you buy the Louis Derbez purse, you know? It's only $100. Which one do you buy? You buy the Louis Vuitton, okay? So flavor and taste has something to say. But these guys are inefficient because of many reasons, okay? And they could be reasons like they don't have the roads to get the product on time, this, that, what have you. That's part of being underdeveloped, yeah? And the price for them of that item to be produced in Benin or Togo or any of these countries is $1.50. If that's the case, it's practically impossible for them to get into the American market, okay? So the American says, look, I mean, they are underdeveloped. I'm going to help them. Poor guys. So I'm going to help them through trade, which makes a lot of sense. I'm not giving donations. I'm allowing them to do the work and do what have you, and this is fair. Let them have. But I can see that they will not be able to compete with the Mexicans. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them a preferential treatment. I'm going to impose a tariff for imports of bananas from the world of $1. This is the tariff. Okay? Immediately, I have a problem. Because if I bring my product into the American market, I'm going to be selling it at least at $2. $1, which is the cost, and $1. And I want to make a profit, so I'm going to be selling this thing at $2.10, let's say. Okay, so now Mexican bananas will get into the United States at $2.10 a pound. What about the bananas from Benin? They will still be able to come at $1.50. Because I'm imposing no tariff on them in a unilateral manner. Okay? When I do that, these bananas are not going to be sold in the American market because the difference in price is now 60 cents. All of a sudden, the bananas from Benin or Togo or whatever African country have become very competitive in the domestic market of the United States. Two effects. The first one is I am creating trade. It's the trade that comes now from these countries. But I'm destroying trade. I'm diverting trade, the one that used to come. Because the difference in price is so high, what I'm saying now is everybody is worse off as a consumer in the United States. Because before they could get a banana at $1.20, now they will have to pay at least $1.50, if not $2 or whatever. Okay? So I am creating a loss of trade for Mexico, a gain of trade between Benin and the United States, but I'm also creating a cost, an excessive cost to the consumers, because they are now paying $1.50. Because of development reasons and my good heart and everything else, that's fine. Now, I am a producer of bananas in Mexico, so I walk out and say, wait a minute, what did I do wrong? Oh, you belong to a middle-income country. So, I am very efficient. And I'm selling you my bananas, trying not to get a lot of money from you. Why do you discriminate against me? Because you are from a middle-income country. Yeah, but I'm still a producer. I made investments, I did this, I did that. And all of a sudden you come and you invent this development issue. Okay? So one thing is considerations of development, which could bring, justice, which, fine. And the other one is the real trade. What you did with your good heart, you are selling more dearly the bananas in the United States to the American consumer, but in addition, you are creating an inefficiency in the world. Because whereas resources should be used to produce bananas in Mexico, because that's where it will be the best application of the money to produce bananas, you are distorting trade and you are providing incentives to produce it in a different country. Whereas the use of those resources would have been much better in Mexico than in that country. And the only justification for this is your middle-income country, the other one is a developing nation. So, okay, you want to do development, define how you want to do development. Okay? But what is going to happen anyway is there is going to be effects which are real in the trade.
For example, is this punished by the WTO? And if so, how does the WTO apply punishment to countries?
We're going to be seeing this thing, okay?
Okay.
There is a document that I told you to read, which you obviously haven't read, all of you, not only this poor young guy, which is, which one? Okay, read that document, it's everything there, okay? It's only 350 pages, you can do it in 2 days. You need to read that one, by the way, because that's really a basic document for what we're talking.
I think you can help both the use and the African countries, like maybe buying a quarter of the production of the African quarters and buying.
Yeah, so you have a quarter of deficiency. You can give a half. Whatever you do, in the end, is a development issue, okay? It's not an economic issue. Economically speaking, the worst that you can do is do exactly that. Now, what you are saying is, well, give them a break, okay? Poor guys. Yeah, if you were the banana producer, you will be very upset, okay? Now, as long as you're not the banana producer, you say, I give them a break, let them do that. But if you are the banana producer in a country like Mexico, you're going to be very upset because what you're going to say is, wait a minute, I am more productive than these guys. You are my national market. You're right here on my side. I'm sending you the things. Tough luck, you know. Why should I pay for them? And so, if we were talking development theory, it's a very different concept of what you are supposed to be doing and everything else. And this is where everything becomes complicated, okay? Because it's very difficult to separate economic concepts from political concepts, from justice concepts in the world. But in the end, what we are saying is, even Benin will be better off in the long run, because they will be using the resources in those areas where they will have a comparative advantage. That's why all this theory that we saw before is important, because the theory tells you, if I use the Samuelson-Stopler theorem, if I use the Hexler-Holling theorem, if I use the theorem of convergence, if I do all these things, I am telling you that the world is going to be better off. And then you say, oh, well, yeah, but it's going to be in 200 years, so yeah, but it will be better off. Theoretically speaking, it's important that one understands the theoretical basis of what one does. And of course, you're going to be contaminated all over the place because people will say, theory, theory, theory. You know, this is practical. Business is done by pragmatic people, not by theorists. Yeah, but I mean, if they understand the theory, then they're bound to make big mistakes. Yeah, I may agree at some point, so well, I'm part of the Mexican government, and I'm not going to go and fight with the Togolese and the Beninois and just go and say, let them suffer. I'm not going to do that, but the first thing I should do is protect the Mexican interests. That's the whole point of my foreign policy. The whole point of the foreign policy of a country is the welfare of your citizens, and then, of course, the rest of the world. No, leave that for the Catholic Church. We, as an economy, as a government, as an enterprise, the first thing we have to look for is the benefit of my company. Now, do I have the right to do whatever for the benefit of my company? No. That's why theoretical concepts are very important. Because what the theory is telling you, if you do things in a fair system, then you should be doing those things. But it's very different from justifying, oh, well, then I'm going to contaminate the world. Oh, no, wait a minute. There are costs to everybody if you do those things. So pollution is an issue in the world because it will affect everybody, including our own citizens. And if you do not take into consideration pollution issues, then you are really not allocating correctly the resources of the world. But I don't care. I'm a company, so I have the right to throw, dirty water into the river. I'm not going to clean up all the mess I make. Wait a minute. You have an obligation to recognize the costs and pay for that. These are called, a whole theory of externalities in economic analysis, which is, this is not fair, this is not right. So not everything is right, okay? Yeah, but many companies just look the other side and profit is the most important issue. I'm going to make money regardless of what I have to do. No. Here we haven't said anything wrong. All we said is, I have a company which is very efficient. And I have another company which is efficient but less efficient. This company should have the right to sell everything it can in that market. If the market then all of a sudden is constrained because of artificial barriers, then it's unfair for these guys. Okay? They haven't done anything wrong. Now, if you come to me and say, well, they have a $1 because what they are doing is they're stealing money from this and that, well, that's a different story. And you have an issue of behavior. And it's not right. No one should be competitive because he's doing wrong things. So if the law says that you have to do this and that, you have to fulfill the law. Oh, but then, what I'll do is I'll give money to this guy and he will look the other way and then I can contaminate the river. Well, that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that.
So what you're saying is that maybe bilateral and plurilateral agreements have a negative externality on the world?
It's a big debate right now in the economic literature, and there's a lot of studies. I'm going to give you a lot of things to read if you want, where it shows that in some cases yes, in some cases no, and so the jury is still out. But the majority of the economic profession will agree that RTAs, PTAs are not necessarily good, okay? That you have more reasons to believe that the trade diversion effect is costing more to welfare than the trade creation effect, okay? And in that perspective, now you can come to me and say, well, yeah, but look, poor little guys from Togo and Benin. Okay, but that's a different thing. You're not talking economics there, okay? You want to be good with your money, please do it. You're going to give donations, give donations. I have no problem with that. But every time you do that, it's a decision that you are taking unilaterally. And then I'm going to ask you the next question. Why do you favor those guys rather than the ones you have in your country? Because, well, because Africa is really so poor. That's fine, but that's your consideration, okay? But I do have people who are poor in my country, so help those. No, because you're middle income. But my poor people are poor people. That's why it becomes complicated, okay?
No, because Mexico is one of the countries that has more trade agreements, so maybe we've been doing it wrong.
Oh, no. We are absolutely convinced that we are doing it right. The problem with every trade agreement, this is a trade agreement. So in the end, it's a negotiating process. And I'm not going to get everything I wanted, and you're not going to get everything you wanted, okay? So in the end, whenever I do that, I have to account for those negotiations. Every time you negotiate, you give some, you take some, and you don't necessarily end up in the optimal situation. Well, it's a negotiation. Because if we really go theoretical, okay, then we know that, forget about all this nonsense, let free flow goods all over the world. End of story. Oh, but you want to live in Germany. That's your privilege. Go and live in Germany. Who cares about nationality? Who cares about all these things? We are one single race, human race. We are one single world, the world. Let full mobility. Let everything happen. You don't like that? Yes, this will be the world, okay? Do you have any problem to go from Puebla to Tamaulipas? No. That's the definition, yeah. But I mean, from the standpoint of what happens, do you have any problem from selling a product that you produce in Puebla to be sold in Tamaulipas or in Chihuahua or whatever? No. Do they charge you extra for this or that? No. Do they charge you extra for the transportation? No. So why is it that we accept that concept internally for Mexico and we cannot accept it for an integration with the rest of the world?
It's called nationalism.
Yeah. And therefore, it's a very different issue, okay? It's all these strange things that you happen. I speak Spanish and you speak English, and therefore, we are different. Once you learn to speak English, you are equal to them. Oh, you have an accent. Yeah, sure. They do too. I mean, you go to Texas and they have an accent. And you go to Connecticut, they have another accent. And in Spanish, you go to Chihuahua, they have an accent. You come to Puebla, we have an accent. We sing the words. You don't notice that because you are from Puebla. But you go outside and people say, why do you sing? I thought you were singing, nothing. So we are the same, yeah? Well, no. Different color of the skin, does that make you different? Yeah, but during many, many years people thought we were different, yeah? Regardless of the fact that every time you open a human body has the same elements. Because the skin was brown, dark, or white, there was differences. We should send those to hell, okay? We are not different. Forget about discrimination. We are going to be discriminated in trade. Don't tell me we don't discriminate in many other things. We do. So the most important aspect is tolerance and integration. Everybody is the same in this world. The difference is not everybody has the same opportunities. Okay? Opportunity is the key word in the world. But here, what we see is that transformation. Okay? So what happens is you end up with preferential trade agreements, which can be bilateral or plurilateral. Okay? As you move in that is, you not only can have that, you can also have reciprocal or unilateral preferences. Okay? And then you go one step higher. You do a customs union. That's a completely different beast, different animal. I had an agreement here, and I can go into a free trade area. This is different from this, and this can be different from this. Okay? And so a custom union is, when I do that, it's a higher form of trade integration, because what I'm going to do is not only I'm going to have trade integration, but in addition, you and I are going to have the same defense against the rest of the world. It's called a common tariff. Okay? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to be adding here something which is a common external tariff set. Okay? So one difference is we do have the same policy regarding trade with the rest of the world. Isn't that what you did here? No. Isn't that what you did here? No. A free trade area is a common market for the two of us. But when it's not the United States, Mexico, and Canada, we can have different tariffs vis-a-vis China. Okay? If I have a free trade area, if I have a preferential trade agreement, what I'm going to be doing is I have agreements between the two or several countries, but does not necessarily have a common policy vis-a-vis other countries. Whereas if I form a customs union, then I have the same trade policy vis-a-vis other countries, because I'm establishing what is called common external tariffs. You go to Europe, look at what happens in Europe. You have the European Union, but you have also other things. Now, in the European Union, you have a common trade policy. Okay? You have 27 countries. And each and every one of them is going to have the same trade policy vis-a-vis Mexico, but also vis-a-vis China, but also vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Okay? This is a customs union. We have the same customs policy, the same trade policy against the rest of the world. But now we have an agreement with Mexico. Yeah, that's a preferential trade agreement, bilateral agreement between the European Union and Mexico. Once we have agreed on that, we have one single tariff structure for goods coming from Mexico. And Mexico has one common structure, tariff structure, for goods coming from the European Union. But my policy as country vis-a-vis China is different from the policy of the European Union. We don't have a customs union, we have a trade agreement. Okay? Shoes coming from China, 50% tariff in Mexico. Goods coming from China, 0 tariff in the European Union. Okay, we don't have the same common external tariff. Okay? Is that understood? That's the difference. The difference is, if I agree on something like this, I agree that I have a common tariff policy, a common trade policy. If I agree with something like this or like this, I don't need to have the same trade policy or tariff policy. So free trade areas are free trade areas, but they are not custom unions. And then I have another step. What happens if I integrate? Oh, then you are becoming a different beast also. You are becoming more and more like my country, where all the states that belong to my country have the same policies of trade, taxes, etc. Okay? And so as I'm moving in this direction, I'm looking at more and more types of integration. So it's just stages of integration that I'm defined. So the other question that we're going to ask ourselves is regional integration as a goal. But that's a different beast, okay? That's the European Union. That's the integration that the 50 states of the United States have. If I go to any state in the United States, I should find the same tariff in terms of imports. I should have the same restrictions in terms of my trade policy. I don't go to Texas and they have one trade policy with Mexico, or I go to Connecticut and I have a different trade policy. Yeah, because they are not 50 countries, they are 50 states in one country. Well, what the European Union is trying to do is exactly that. It's transforming 27 countries into one single country. They are in the process of integrating themselves. They can integrate in trade, so they have a regional integration policy in trade, or they can integrate in money, the monetary union, or they can integrate politically. Those are stages of integration. Yes?
So if Mexico trade with Germany is the same that he trade with, I don't know, Spain or...
Any of the 27 countries do have the same restrictions and same freedoms for our trade. Okay? So when you negotiate with them, there will be one particular country called Spain or Italy that will come and say, wait. Olives, olive oil. I don't like that. Mm-mm. So the French come and said, we don't care about the olive oil. Fine, let them get in. But the Spaniards and the Italians and the Portuguese will come and say, wait a minute, olives are important to us. And therefore, in the negotiating process, those countries will put a veto to the kind of agreement that you can reach with them. And so the European Union then will have to come to you and say, olives are off the table. And you say, why? I mean, 24 out of 27 don't care, yeah, but the other 3 do care. And so, tough luck, we won't do it. Because you are not negotiating country by country, you are negotiating with the European Union. Because they have a common trade policy. They have a commissioner for policy of trade. Okay? So whenever they have integrated themselves, you are no longer negotiating with one country, you are negotiating with the 27 at the same time. That's why it's so complicated to negotiate with the European Union. Who raised a hand? Yes.
And if it's the other way around, like if Germany wants to do a business with,
They
like
can't.
a trade with,
They can't. They can't.
no.
No. If the state of Puebla wants to make a negotiation with the United States and say, look, I mean, if you send goods to Puebla, there is going to be no tariffs for everything you send. No way, you cannot do that. You are not, in that sense, sovereign to do that kind of policy. There is only one entity who can do that. It's called the federal government of Mexico. And so whoever does negotiations is the federal government of Mexico. Now the governor of Puebla can come with the Mexican government and say, I really want to give this concession, or I don't want corn to come to Mexico.
Like Audi?
Well, Audi is a different negotiation. Audi is a negotiation of foreign direct investment. Okay?
But
The rules of foreign direct investment have to be abided by anyone who makes investments in Mexico. Okay? And those are the same rules. Now, what the state provides are additional incentives which are allowed so that the company establishes itself in Mexico, but specifically in Puebla. Okay? Now that's a different fight. The fight there is, wait, you fulfill everything that is federal, but guess what? As a state, I'm willing to give you this and that, which is within my possibility. Okay? I'll give you the land free.
You can offer whatever the state wants.
Yeah, if the state wanted to say something like, if Audi establishes in Puebla, only Audi cars can be sold in Mexico, then the Mexican government says, forget it, man, that's not on the books. You can do whatever, but that is not an incentive you can offer. Even if you were to say, they can only sell Audis in Puebla, I'm going to say to you, no way. In Puebla, everybody has to respect the same rules. So there will be able to sell Fords, Toyotas, whatever brand you want can be sold in Puebla. As long as I, as Mexican community, accept those cars. By the same token, if there were a banning on Audi cars, okay, for whatever reason, and it was accepted by the federal government, you could not bring the Audi plant in Mexico because no car is going to be sold in Mexico. And so what you will tell them is, look, you can build the cars here, but you cannot sell them in Mexico. You want to do that? No, I don't want to do that. But the governor of Puebla tells me, yeah, but he doesn't have the authority to open the market of Mexico for your cars. Okay? Now consider that, and that's exactly what's happening when you go into a regional integration, and then once you are integrated, you become one block in negotiating process with the rest. If I want to have a customs union with them, I have to fulfill their common trade policy. But I don't want that. So what happens then is I end up with my own trade policy vis-a-vis the rest of the world, and they have their own trade policy vis-a-vis the rest of the world. We never created a customs union. We only created a free trade area. Okay?
In the reading for today, I remember that it said that, I don't remember what was the structure of the agreement, but that Turkey had 27 out of 100 with the European Union because it was negotiated separately.
Mm-hmm.
What you were saying that you don't negotiate separately, so what was that about?
In some specific concepts, you can do that. But if you were to do that, you would have 27 agreements. And when you negotiate now with the European Union, you have one agreement with 27 countries. And we all have to abide by the same rules. Okay? The 27 countries and you, once you reach a negotiating agreement, have to abide by the same rules. It will be very difficult, very complicated if you deal with 27 different countries. Everything is taking place at the same time, so one of the things that's happening is some regions are integrating themselves. As they integrate themselves, many of these aspects are going to change. And so, if I have an agreement with China, and I integrate with the United States into a regional integration process, and we have a common trade policy, one of the biggest obstacles is going to be, what is going to be our common policy vis-a-vis China? Because I have a different policy, you have a different policy, and now we're going to make it the same policy. Okay? One of the biggest problems of the famous migration agreement, which was never discussed, unfortunately, by our government. And what I mean by our government, I mean myself, okay? The government of Fox. When we started this discussion is that a big mistake was made in there, which no one noticed at the time, okay? I didn't start those negotiations, so I can criticize. But what happened was, if I go into a migration agreement as the one that we said that we will be doing, we, the Mexican government, in the year 2000, okay? Then you have a problem, which is, if you really reach an agreement with the American, and you create an area of free trade of labor, okay? Then this region, because of that agreement, will have common labor policy. And if that translates into migration, then you have a common migration policy. Okay? If you have a common migration policy, the discussion is whose policy is going to be the one. Now, this is the United States and this is Mexico. Which policy do you think in the end is going to be the policy? Okay, because they are big ones, yeah? They are the ones who give the biggest concessions. So, assuming without conceding that that's going to be the end result, just imagine how funny it would have been the following. Thank God it didn't happen, but that was my big discussion at the end, okay? I don't draw too well, but let's suppose this is pretty much the United States, yeah? You have Florida, and then it goes like this. You have Mexico with our things, and it's like that. And then Mexico keeps going this way. And this is Central America. All of a sudden, for labor purposes, these are not the borders. These are the borders. Okay? Inside this, people can come and go. Labor mobility. All these people who want to come, now I became the keeper of the gate. Yeah? I cannot let them in. So all my migration policy is going to be determined by this common migration policy, and therefore I'm going to be now the enforcer of what the Americans are doing here. Guess who's going to be building walls? I mean, maybe the Americans will give us the money, but the walls are going to be on my territory in Mexico. Because what we're going to do is we're going to stop the flow of people coming from Central America and the rest of the continent into the United States. They have to go through my territory, and therefore, I am going to be the keeper of the gate. Whereas right now, we are not the keepers of the gate, okay? What we do now is we tell these guys, welcome migrants. You are in Mexico, you have rights, you can do whatever. Go from here to here. Whatever happens from here to here is the problem of the Americans, because we don't have a common migration policy.
Yes, but narco is one of the problems for
The narcos have no problem. The narcos can come this way, this way, this way, this way. They don't respect borders, okay? I mean, what is really fascinating for me is to listen that the Mexican narco-traffickers, yeah, but these guys have no nationality, okay? I mean, they were born in Mexico, maybe, and they may have a Mexican passport, I have no idea. They probably have about 20 passports anyway. But they don't have nationality. They don't care about Mexico. They only care about their business. And so what they do is, this is a true multinational corporation. If there is one, it is the narco-traffickers. They don't care where they produce, where they consume. It's a market for them, and it's a common market. Do you really believe that they respect? I mean, they do everything under the table. These are not legal imports, these are not legal exports, these are not legal consumption, these are not legal financing. These are illegal people. They happen to have been born in Mexico. Tough luck for the Mexicans, okay? I would rather they be Colombians. But they are Mexicans. They have become very intelligent. What can I say?
What do you think is going to happen with the new law of migrations?
But that's a different question. What the Americans are talking about is a reform of their own law. Who enforces that law? So I don't care. In other words, why do I fight to have them legalized? Who are they? The 11 million Mexicans who are there. Because I want them to have a better life. That is my responsibility as governor of Mexico, to protect my citizens. And there are 11 million of them in the United States. As if you go to Europe in vacation, you're going to be one Mexican in Europe. And if anything happens to you, I have to protect you. Okay? The problem is, this is one. This is 11 million. So there's a lot of them. And I need to concentrate my efforts in helping them get a better life. Can they come back to Mexico? Yeah. Anyone have told these guys that they cannot return to Mexico? No. What they are afraid of is if they come to Mexico, they will not be able to return to the United States. But I have no power over that, okay? I give them their passport, I give them whatever. And I protect them once they are here or there. But I have 11 million of them there, and they are not being well treated by the Americans. So what I do is I have a program to support them. When I transformed that idea into a migration agreement, it was a different negotiation. What I was negotiating without really understanding what I was negotiating. I don't really think that the administration of folks at the beginning understood what we were talking about. What we were talking about was, if you do that, you are going to be the enforcer of the common policy on migration in this area. And therefore, your relationship with Central America is going to be affected by the decision that you took in terms of this regarding people. Regarding people. When we had NAFTA, we took that decision. The decision that we took in NAFTA was, these guys are excluded. And therefore, I am going to be the enforcer of the law that says that they cannot bring something into Mexico and export it into the United States if it is not produced in Mexico, free of that. So I'm going to have that control. But I don't have a customs union with the Americans, and therefore my policy vis-a-vis these countries, my trade policy is different from the trade policy of the United States. And so what I did is I came to these countries and I signed bilateral and then plurilateral agreements, trade agreements with them. So I have a trade policy with Central America which is not the same that the Americans have. Yeah, because I'm not a customs union. Okay? I'm just a free trade zone. Yeah? So all of these things are different things.
They have set the bilateral and plurilateral agreements.
I'm sorry?
The Guatemala and...
Oh, well, in the last administration, we finally convinced ourselves and these guys that it makes no sense to have 5 different bilateral agreements, that we'd rather have one single common area agreement. And so I may be mistaken, but I don't think so. It's at the end of the administration of Calderon, they finally signed a regional agreement between the 5 countries of Central America that we had an agreement with, excludes Panama and Mexico. And so we have now one agreement with these 5 countries. And that agreement is the same for the 5 countries, yes, because we negotiated with them in block. Okay? Now, in that particular case, which was one of the questions, I may have exceptions by country. Some countries may say, look, we had a bilateral agreement, we had these things, and we excluded this. I want to remain with those excluded, even though my other countries did. Because you are in the process of reaching a final agreement. So you can put a clause that says, okay, temporarily, we're still going to be respecting these things vis-a-vis Costa Rica or Guatemala. But in the end, it's going to be an agreement with the 5 countries. It makes more sense for us, but it doesn't necessarily make more sense for them. Except for one reason, that they are trying to integrate themselves into a Central America common market and a Central America region. Okay? So the reason why we are doing that now is because they are more and more integrating themselves as one single region in terms of trade. They are becoming more like the European Union in terms of trade. And so if they reach that point, they have a common trade policy. Then I negotiate only with whoever represents those 5 countries in that common trade policy.
And what would happen to Panama in that case of agreement?
It's excluded from all of us. But I don't want to be included because you know the trade regime they have, and they don't produce anything, okay? And so the problem for them is I produce the Panama Canal and a few goods, tourism among them. So I don't want to be part of your thing because you're going to invade me with things, which is not true, but anyway, that's what they think. Okay? The Panamanians have been always kind of, we are more Americans than the rest of you guys because we have the Panama Canal. Now the Panama Canal resources, the revenues of the Panama Canal is impressive. That's why Panama is growing at 7 and 8% per year. Okay, these are the basic things that we're going to be discussing in this section, okay? So here it is then, the definitions. Regional Trade Agreement, RTA, is used to refer to an agreement between two or more countries to apply lower trade policy barriers to goods and services imported from the members than to those imported from third countries. So whenever I make an agreement, you and I have a common policy regarding your products and my products, your services and my services, but we exclude the others from that, and I can have a different trade policy with the others. So the third countries are the others, okay? They don't belong to our group. A free trade area agreement is a preferential trade agreement for which barriers on trade between members are reduced or eliminated, and the term usually suggests other policy measures in addition to discriminatory trade preferences. Okay? I'm going to be adding things. FTA members may elect to impose a common external tariff, CET, for each product. A CET may be imposed with or without the continued use of internal customs controls. This is important. What it means is, if I do it with or without, then it depends on whether I have a regional or a national customs authority. And then, of course, the customs union is a free trade area with a set in which all internal customs controls can be eliminated. So once a product gets into the area, it doesn't pass through another customs inspection. Once I introduce a product in Spain, it can travel free of taxes, trade taxes, between Spain and Italy and Portugal and Germany and whatever. So I can choose my point of entry, Germany. Once I do get into Germany, there is a customs official, may have a German dress, okay? But it doesn't make any difference. It's going to be the same policy. So what he's going to say in German is the same thing that the French will tell you in French. You pay 20% tax. En español, français, o lo que sea. Okay? So what you have there is a common internal customs control. You don't go again and again and again in different. But in our free trade area, we have different customs controls. Okay? A product gets into Mexico, goes through there, and when it gets into the United States, passes controls again. Okay? Not only does have controls in Mexico, it has to also pass controls in the United States. Oh, but it's a free trade area, it doesn't matter. We have two different customs authorities, and both of them will check. Unless we reach an agreement. If we reach an agreement and the Americans accept that anything that comes from Mexico, once it passes the Mexican customs authorities, is free of transportation, then we have a different thing, okay? What we have now is internal controls with or without. As it happens right now in Mexico, it is with. You pass it in Mexico and you pass it in the United States. You pass it in the United States and you pass it in Mexico. A good that is imported into the United States passes customs in the United States. But when it gets to Mexican territory, it passes customs again. Okay? You go to Germany, you land in Germany, you pass through customs in Germany, and then you fly between Germany and France. You don't pass customs again. Okay? Because they have a different type of agreement, both in terms of what they have integrated themselves, but also in terms of how they check. Okay? So the customs union, we said, is this thing. And then, of course, a common market is, in terms of economic integration, the deepest form of economic integration, because it allows the free movement of productive factors, labor, capital, and goods and services. Okay? We don't have a common market with the United States. We have a free trade area. In the free trade area, we can pass goods and services, but labor mobility is not allowed. So we don't have a common market. These are different elements. It's just definitions, okay? Then, of course, preferential trade agreements are PTAs. They are unilateral trade preferences. They include GSP schemes. general system of preferences. Okay? GSP is a general system of preferences. Non-reciprocal preferential schemes for products from LDCs only. ACP allowed goods from Benin and Togo, as well as other non-reciprocal preferential schemes that have been granted a waiver by the General Council, such as the Agricultural Organization in Africa and the CARICAN. Okay? So what you have is what we said. I am unilateral giving you preferences. The new RTAs are not exclusively linking the most developed economies, okay? And they go now far beyond tariff cutting exercises. The common concept is, oh, you put a free trade area because what you're going to be doing is eliminating tariffs. Not only that, now we're getting more and more concessions. So, standards. In Mexico, we have something called normas, okay? We then say, look, if you check a car in the United States and you establish environmental standards for that car, we are going to be having the same environmental standards between Mexico and the United States. Why does that make sense? Right.
Because it allows like an integration of the market between those countries.
In what sense?
Well, having the same standards makes like like a frame that will allow deeper integration by having that.
But can you think of an example why this is important? Yeah. Give me your name because one of the few people are still missing your name.
Jose.
Jose. Okay. Jose, why will be important? Okay. Imagine that you are an investor and you're going to be producing cars in Mexico, but most of the sales of your cars are in the United States. You will sell some in Mexico, most of them in the United States. Why is it important that you have the same standards accepted by both countries in terms of pollution standards?
Well, because if you're producing here in Mexico and you have some standards by manufacturing the cars, if the standards were higher in the United States, then you would have a problem because the pollution that you will create, the pollution that the cars would create here in Mexico would not be accepted in the United States. So you would have to lower that standards here in Mexico, even though the national standards were a little.
So the first problem is you will have two lines of production, yeah?
Yeah.
One for cars that go to the United States, one for cars that go to Mexico. That in itself is a complication. So the first thing you say to these guys is, look, if I'm going to be producing cars, I'm going to be taking the higher standards possible. Because then I want to have one single production line. And that's efficient, that's why I want things. But then the second thing comes and says, yeah, but who's going to be verifying that your pollution standards are up to standard? Whoever, okay? Because the highest level is the American, let's say it's the Mexican, whatever, okay? Then you want that officer to agree with you that your car fulfills the standards, yeah? But this is a waste of time because then I need to bring the Americano to my factory and have them check here, and then I can send my cars. So why is it that you don't allow the Mexicano to do that? And the answer is because the Mexicanos have a different standard. And so that guy is going to walk here and he's going to say, this car passes the standard, but as it happens, it doesn't pass the standard of the United States. And therefore, we need to agree on standards. And we also have to agree that once we agree on standards and we have a common standard, the person who checks that standard, be Mexican or be American, is enough for the process to take place. Okay? So this is exactly the cost that we're trying to avoid. So Do I want to create problems for production of cars and therefore create a non-tariff barrier? Then I say different standards and they have to be checked in my country. And automatically you are creating a barrier to trade. Okay? So when we're looking about these things, this is becoming increasingly more complex. And what I'm doing now is not only tariffs, but I'm also discussing standards, I'm also discussing customs administration, many things. These are called in many ways trade facilitation measures. Because what I want is I want to facilitate trade rather than create difficulties for that trade to take place. Good. Okay? So we're talking about every time getting more and more sophisticated. Okay? The RTAs are more and more sophisticated. They go beyond traditional trade policy mechanisms to include regional rules on investment, competition, environment, and labor. As we are moving, we are complicating the process. Because now I want to have pollution standards, and therefore I have environmental issues. I want to have labor issues. I want to make sure that you don't exploit your workers. I want to make sure that there is no child labor included in the product that is coming to my country. And so I'm adding things. And then I want to make sure that there is competition in your place. There is no subsidies, no benefits, no things that you're given. And I want to make sure that the rules of investment are well. Our trade agreements are becoming more and more complicated. Okay? And so, what do they have in common? What do they have in common is RTAs, not PTAs, okay? RTAs are reciprocal trade agreements. I give and you give. PTAs, I give. General system of preference, I give you that. RTAs are free trade agreements, custom unions, and they are notified under this article, which we're going to be checking, okay? The Article 24-7 of the GATT Agreement, the 94, and the paragraph 2 of the Enabling Clause and Economic Integration Agreements under Article 5-7 of GATS. You know what GATS is?
The rules. The rules.
But what rules? Okay, we're going to have to learn all these little things which are very strange. This is the general agreement on what? Trade of services. Okay? So you're going to have the general agreement on merchandise things, then trade on services, then you're going to have it in TRIMS, as they are called, which is the control of patents and things of that sort. Okay? Each one of them, then you have an agricultural agreement also. So you have subsets in each one of the general agreement, subsets of agreements that include how you do negotiations in agricultural goods, how do you do negotiations in what is protection of knowledge, okay? How do you do negotiations in goods and services, how do you do negotiations in services specifically, okay? That's part of the fun in this class. So why are these so important now? Because what's happening is that they represent a departure from the non-discrimination principle underlying the GATT multilateral trading system. Okay? We are discriminating against third parties. And therefore, what's happening between what was established at the beginning of the Bretton Woods Conference and what's happening today is that whereas they define non-discrimination as a rule, then slowly what happened is we ended up in a situation where we are discriminating. Now the non-discrimination clause in the negotiations of the WTO are known as MFN. Okay? MFN, in fact, is a system where you have something called most favored nation, which implies once I reach an agreement with you, we're going to be favoring everybody else. Whatever I give to the most favored nation in my negotiation goes for everybody. Okay? What I gave to the most favored, the one that I really like, among my children, this is my most favored child. and I give to my most favored son the right to go to college, then to my less favored son, I also have to grant him the right to go to college. Okay? So whatever I give to the most favored nation I choose, I'm sitting with him, and he and I agree on something. Whatever he and I agreed, now he and I have to make extensive to all of you. I cannot discriminate. He became my most favorite person, okay? Because I negotiated with him. Because he's the one I'm really interested in negotiating with. But once I reach an agreement with him, whatever I give him and whatever he gives me has to be given to all of you. I cannot discriminate. That's why it's called the most favored nation non-discrimination principle. And so you will get used to this, because what it says all the time is people will say, well, you have to give them FN treatment. Meaning what? Meaning that whatever you give to the person that you like the best, you have to give to the rest of the world, even if you don't like them. Okay?
But shouldn't that stop, well, that won't give incentives for people to have new trade agreements because of...
And so what happened was, because this is what we imposed in the 40s, we made a clause that provides the possibility. WTO rules allow an exception to the non-discriminatory principle. Okay? This is the question you were asking. Under certain conditions, however, despite important recent advances toward greater transparency, oversight of WTO rules on RTAs has proven weak. As a result, in the past 2 decades, the number of RTAs have risen sharply, and they now cover 1/3 to 1/2 of global trade. Yeah, I gave this agreement and I said, you can make an exception under the following rules, and we're going to discuss those rules, okay? This. And you come and says, yeah, we're doing that. But I don't have the capacity to supervise. And therefore, what's happening now is to have all these crazy RTAs. And they now go beyond trade. You go into the financial trade, services, investments flows, and other rules. In the past 20, 25 years, there has been what Yahish Bhagwati, which is one of the top economists in this area, calls an spaghetti bowl process. Okay? He called it the spaghetti bowl. And we're going to see a graph what it means. We're going to finish with this. By July 2005, only one member of WTO, and probably in the next 6 months it won't be anymore, Mongolia. Okay, so what's the capital of Mongolia? This, for next class, you have to know. President Fox one time landed in that place. And it's a very interesting place. They're doing strange things in Mongolia, so you should take a look. I mean, I know that it sounds like, oh, you know, Attila the Hun and all that, but in fact, Mongolia is now becoming a very important country because of certain specific things that they can produce no one else can. But Mongolia, which is a country that no one really pays attention to ever, was not a party to the regional trade agreement. It's the only country. There are now 156 countries in the WTO. Only Mongolia has not, or is not part of the regional trade agreement. But it soon will be. It happens by July 2005, 330 agreements have taken place. Think about this. If we have 330 RTAs, it implies more RTAs than countries, which therefore implies that many countries are in different RTAs at the same time. Yeah, we're one of them. 206 were notified and created in January 1995. 180 are currently in force. Several others are believed to be operational, although not yet notified. So people are doing these things, but they never notify us that we're doing. Article 24 of WTO is the one, and says that if a free trade area or customs union is created, these are the conditions, okay? Duties and other trade barriers should be reduced or removed substantially on all sectors trade in the group. Non-members, whoever is not part of this agreement, non-members should not find trade with the group any more restrictive than before the group was set up. Okay? So what we are saying in the banana example is, you're going to have RTA, you're going to have a preferential trade agreement, you cannot stop me from having the treatment I had before. This is important because what it implies is when I give these preferential trade agreements now, I'm going to be having a hard time showing that non-members are not finding trade more difficult than before. Okay?
Could you put, like, in the example of bananas, could you put like the tariffs up and then make the trade agreement?
If you do that before, yes. If you do that after, you're doomed, okay? And so this is the key element. The key element is, if I was importing bananas and bananas had a tariff of 50%, and then I reach an agreement, an RTA or an APTA, and I said, look, whoever is in this now has to pay only 0, the rest still pays 50, you are fulfilling the rules, okay? Because what you are saying is, in many ways you are telling people, duties and other trade barriers are reduced or removed substantially on all sectors of trade. And non-members are not finding trade with the group any more restricted than before. Even though this is not absolutely true, okay? Because what happened is, because now I'm eliminating the barriers on this, he's going to find it more restricted because these guys are going to get into the market. So there is a lot of discussion going on in this issue. And then the second thing is, Article 5 of the other agreement, the General Agreement on Trade and Services, provides for economic integration agreements in services. Other provisions of WTO agreements allow developing countries to enter into regional or global agreements that include the reduction or elimination of tariffs and non-tariff barriers on trade among themselves. So regional integration is a different concept, and I'm accepting that as a process. Regional agreements have allowed groups of countries to negotiate rules and commitments that go beyond what was possible at the time multilaterally. Okay? Because what's happening in many ways is, I'm willing to give this to Mexico, but I'm not willing to make it for everybody. And because I allowed this process to take place, I have seen progress in the reduction of tariffs in the world. But this is not even. No, it's not even. So what you're going to see now is peaks and valleys all over the place. Okay? Because what I'm doing is I have a general valley at the beginning, and then I agree with this guy in something, I get this thing down, but for the other people it's up. So I have a peak and a valley now. Is that better off than before? Many people are going to say yes, because at least now we have this group of trade under conditions of lower tariffs, lower barriers. Yeah, but what about the trade diversion? We have to make those analyses. Those are the articles I gave you, okay? One of the things that Anne Kruger is one of the top economists in this area. She was vice president of the World Bank looking at all research, and she is a trade specialist. So take a look at the articles, we'll see you next class. I'm going to send you a message this afternoon, and I'm going to be telling 4 people that will be leading a debate in next class. And we're going to make it a real debate. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 of those little things, I'm going to put them there, and we're going to have a TV debate in front of all of you, okay? I will send you the message. Now the people that can relax in this one are the ones who are already presented, okay? But the rest will suffer. See you next class.